Hello and welcome, everybody. Welcome, Colin, Joss. Do you know what? We just wanted to come and do a final AP Connect live stream because we had that fantastic experience of our fourth and final AP Connect National Conference the other week. Then we went away and slept for a week, and it just felt like we had just a little bit of unfinished business in terms of sharing our own reflections with you. So the conference presented the past, present and future of AP Connect. And we asked you at each stage to give us your thoughts, your reflections. What do you think, feel or want to say? And we were absolutely blown away by your response, particularly to that part of the conference. And I think we just want to bounce off that a bit for the next 20 minutes. So Colin, Joss, who wants to go? Colin, it makes sense if we go with you, then Joss, then me. Colin, what do you think to those responses?
Well, thanks, Lou. I mean, they were really thoughtful, and thank you so much for taking the time, everybody, to put those thoughts together. There's a huge amount, I think, Lou and Joss, to build on their huge encouragement, really, for the past as a strong platform for the future, but also, I think, what can be done differently. There's lots of unfinished business for me, and it's something I really don't want to walk away from. It's, you know, you've all given so much energy and emotion and love to this program, and it feels that it's a mere punctuation mark than the closing of a chapter or even the book. I was interested to see that there were people who went back similar length of time to me in education, FE, and some of it tested my authenticity, that I was grateful that I'd remembered it reasonably correctly. Yet there was so much that we didn't talk about. And I think at the beginning I mentioned the evolution and the development of advanced practice need to sit alongside other strands. And the one you reflected on most, I think, in the Think Notes response was about professionalism and professional standards and the various expectations of professionalism. And I know there's a lot of work being done behind the scenes about that. So I think that's one of the important links between advanced practice and other aspects. Over to you, Joss.
Thanks, Colin.
You looked at the present, didn't you?
I did. I looked at the present. And I just have to say, I was also blown away by some of the responses to the past as well. And I just think that there's more of that story to tell. I really do. And I was just struck by how people really appreciated hearing that story when perhaps they hadn't been part of it. And I always think that that past is so important in terms of our own foundations, you know, in whatever capacity we're in. The present. So my think note was around the present, and I deliberately used the 5 questions from the thriving and surviving during COVID research, which the ETF commissioned. And that was really deliberate. I used those 5 questions. And, you know, I've been thinking over the past week, and I've been thinking, you know, when I talked about the Venn diagram, which talks about some of the 3 key findings. One of them was around virtual architecture. I've been thinking quite hard, actually, what does that virtual architecture actually look like? If we were to put a real magnifying glass on it, for the AP Connect program in particular, we had that online platform or Slack. And it's really interesting. Some people said, you know, when I first started with that, you know, I hated it, but actually now it's become so important as a form of resourcing, a form of connection, a form of energy, drawing energy from that. But I think to myself, you know, if we've been so close to the program that actually I'd love to step a little bit away. Actually, we'll get an opportunity to do that as the official program is now closed. But what does virtual architecture look like? We have a platform. In our case, it was Slack. We had facilitators within that, working quite hard also to get people engaged with the space. So that's an area I'm really interested in. How do you design virtual architecture, which really where people feel connected across what we use, that language of the FE pan organizational landscape, because those are one of the big things which came through on the for us at the national conference, one of those sort of key insights, that the key findings, I guess, that we're sharing with the sector. But I'm just looking at question 2 on my screen here, and people were saying, you were saying to us, virtual spaces are crucial to those on the ground. They've been transformational in supporting a networking culture. They literally, they are the mechanism that help, that sharing and ideas, that supporting each other. And this is one of the areas people really wanted to continue. And I love this one. Lou, you're going to laugh at this one. Slack was a confusing mess for the first year of APC for me. Now I get the sense of it being a real space where we can decide to share something, meet people, mull over ideas. I love the Festival Friday stuff, and we'll continue and would happily continue with that. Ideas room, try it first here, etc. And I think that's what happens when you introduce something new. There is that confusion, that resistance initially. I was like that with Slack first. Lou said to me, "Just, can we use Slack for us as a project team?" Do you remember saying that, Lou? And I was like, okay. And and one of those benefits as a project team is how agile we've been able to be and to respond as a project team to things in real time as they're emerging, just like you have been able to do in that virtual space in Slack. So those are some of my key reflections.
Yeah, the shock of the new has resonated all the way through AP Connect, hasn't it? And I was writing over the weekend for our blog, and to go out in big communication we're sending out today. And I was thinking about how AP Connect really was in its existence like a game of two halves. So that first 2 years of really building on the research, establishing what the AP role was, starting to think about, how it can operate differently, building stories of impact and experience, and then COVID and the shock of COVID and the timing of it all, that actually we've reached the end of this, this iteration of AP Connect. We've reached the end of it, the program, around the 2-year COVID anniversary. Just feels really timely at a time where I think people are actually starting to finally be able to just take a peek behind them and think, what the hell was that? And then the second half, years 3 and 4 of AP Connect, just being this amazing flourishing of potential, of change that has been really challenging for many organizations, has challenged the status quo in lots of ways. APs were those sort of like first responders, weren't they? When we went into lockdown, the people who, really took things online and were so creative, and then faced the go backery of, it needs to go back to normal. And now after 2 years, and I'm listening to a lot of podcasts around this, reading a lot of articles around this, we're like, okay, so what have we learned? What have we learned that's going to be useful for the future? And that's why the past is so important, because our past in advanced practice, and I was once an advanced practitioner, even though I wasn't called that, our past is not just the last 2 years. It's going right back, as you did, Colin, on the day, and you reconnected us with a history that had always been there. Unless we hold on to that short-termism, which is always rife in the public sector, is just going to continue to take us round a swirl of just a circle of doing the same things over and over again. I was listening to a podcast this morning, some research which has looked at toxic workplace cultures, and the most toxic thing, the thing that nobody ever wants, nobody ever finds any good in, reorganization, restructuring. And that is, that's we can forget when we're in that again, that actually we've been in that again and again and again. And that longevity of experience was so important. But thinking about the future, the thing that I had the honor and privilege to do on the conference was to be responsible for the symbolic moment when we handed stewardship of advanced practice, of the communities of practice, the constellations, over to the APs. It was a very emotional moment. I can still I can still feel it a bit at the back of my eyes when I think about that moment, because actually there's been such a huge message in AP Connect that has picked up pace around being anti-competitive, around being pro-social, and around not trying to own things. You can't own communities. Well, you can, but you'll kill them. You'll make them stale and moribund. The live communities and constellations that AP Connect is just one part of, through that virtual architecture that we've been able to put into place, is something that can't be owned, shouldn't be controlled, but can be stewarded. And we have stewarded it as a practice of care, and we've handed over that stewardship now to the sector. And that feels really, really special. Yeah, it feels really special to have been able to do that and to learn so much along the way about that. It's a real new way of working. And the other thing that I was thinking about when I was writing the blog was that doesn't need to be monitored and measured. Communities, constellations, how people engage with one another, the potential energy in that. Nobody needs to measure that. It's immeasurable. It doesn't matter. What are your KPIs? How can you design them so you're not a hostage to fortune? How can you design systems and processes that make them easy to evidence, get the work, do the evidencing, knock it off, accurate, efficient, and then get on with the work of values-led practice, of drawing up that energy from the constellations that we are all co-stewards of. And it was a lovely moment to be able to do that. Yeah. What do you think, Colin?
Wow. Fantastic, Lou. Thanks for putting that so clearly. I think you've touched on a lot of important issues for me. I like the idea of stewardship. I also like the idea of curation as well. And I remember looking at the data that where that virtual architecture came from. And I was surprised looking at that, how important that curation was. I was expecting naively the virtual architecture to just be occurring serendipitously. It was just there. It was just a device to help the conversation. But it wasn't. It wouldn't have happened without your vision, Lou, and your vision, Joss. It was a really important curation, just as though, going to an art gallery, the way the art is arranged affects you emotionally and, brings you in, draws you in. So I think curation is a sister concept to stewardship, I think, that was really important. I think what's unique that didn't exist in the past, in my recollection, is the growth of APs in this pan-organisational space. Those were there before, but they were owned, they were choreographed to a very tight script previously. Whereas in the spaces that you created during the programme, people had permission to be themselves, they were safe spaces, and they were able to grow their own characters as critical. I mean, Christina and I spoke about critical theorists and critical realism as well, in terms of coming through those sort of spaces. And I think those spaces, as well as being empowering, also expose the power dynamics that were in play, that were in the, I like the word milieu, in the environment around APs. They were you were very successful at analysing the position of others, other people's ontologies, really, what was driving their thinking. And that thinking may have been colonised by others, the inspectorate's, way of working, etc. So I really commend you for your thinking here, and it's helped me so much. So, Joss, repair the damage I've just done.
I love it, Colin. Love it. I'm just pondering the the partnering of curation and stewardship. So that stewardship in terms of, and Lou's points around, community, that organic growth, it's very difficult and not even desirable perhaps to measure, because that's the very thing that squashes. And I remember from the subject learning coaching days, I think one of the readers, Nancy Dixon, core ways of learning, and she talked very much about how those water cooler conversations, the powerful conversations used to happen, by the coffee machine, by the water cooler, which all of that got stripped away during COVID. But as soon as you try to put a structure to that, it kills the very creativity. I think that's quite an interesting dilemma for people working within projects and funders as well, actually. So I'm just sort of just playing around and sort of thinking about that stewardship and curation. And that curation, it does take bravery, because it means actually what I as a practitioner, or I as a member of a project team, or I as somebody leading a project, what we have developed and co-created matters. And it matters because actually it's been over a period of time, it builds on foundations, it reflects lived experience. And particularly my keynote, and I think I was really reflecting on this about, starting to sort of scratch my head and thinking, actually, some of this doesn't fit with our lived experiences during COVID. And I think that curation is so important, but it's not something that can happen just like that, because it develops over a period of time as you build that sort of confidence, that trust, and that courage, I guess, as well, as practitioners, and that robust evidence base. And I really like this idea. I want to do some more thinking around curation, about virtual architecture. How can some of the past, that present, and the future, how can we support in order to move that forward? So I think that's sort of where I am.
Yeah, it's been so interesting to be able to come to this point of transition and have some space. And we'll need more space, and we'll need more rest, and we all need a bit of a holiday. But to actually look back and think, oh, yes, that's what happened there. Because when you're in the middle of it, and AP Connect has been so busy, hasn't it, with the Festival Fridays and the different strands and projects and people working across different strands and encountering one another in different spaces. We've had a great team working with us, but it's been busy. And now it's time for that quieter reflection and following those threads, and the threads of professionalism, of potential, which is influence rather than status, of curation, of stewardship, of activism. All of those threads really reflect so much work that is happening in business schools, in new thinking around leadership, around organizational development, around what around maybe a new compact between employer and employee, around a new way of thinking about industrial relations, about organizations. They're just not happening in FE. And we have started that conversation in FE, because actually APs have gone back to their organizations with real clarity around the power dynamics in the place, and whether that is the near enemy of the person who is like so appreciative but just keeps blocking the thing happening, or whether it's sort of, hostility, which some APs have experienced. It is there, and it is particularly there in organizations that have really invested in AP Connect, where we've got teams of APs working in this way and actually seeing not only the numbers on the can, but also feeling that changed culture where capacity has been released in colleagues who have had their heads down for the longest time, and all that skill and knowledge and expertise and creativity within the organization is being unlocked by the way in which advanced practitioners are working. It is happening already, and we continue to have So much to learn from that pan-organizational working, which is part of that architecture. So I am just so excited to continue to work and think with the two of you and with everybody who's been involved to actually really draw that learning out. Oh, yeah. Well, we are all in the same place, like we're just in different rooms, which, you know, I don't know if you'd be able to guess that. So we can go and have a real conversation now with each other and have some cake. But whether you've been listening now or you are watching afterwards, add your thoughts in the comments, you know, keep that dialogue open. We ain't gone nowhere. You know, we're still all working in this field together and learning. And we just know those relationships are going to continue to be learning relationships. Thank you, both of you. Thanks, everybody.
Fabulous. Thank you, Lou. Thank you, Colin.